Welcome to We're All Gonna Die and Other Fun Facts, a semi-regular, occasionally amusing, and rarely funny series of conversations on a random topic, back again from another unplanned, unannounced hiatus of indeterminate length. This episode is entitled American Aorta, and it is about, well, its old friend of the podcast, our Jerry Randall of the podcast, Jason Baldinger, has yet another new book, and it's only February, so who knows when he'll be back again this year. Probably more than once.
There's two more coming this year.
There's two more coming this year, so two more Jason Baldinger podcasts probably this year on We're All Gonna Die and Other Fun Facts. And so yes, Jason Baldinger is our guest. Thank you again for being back.
Thanks for inviting me.
So many times.
And happy to, make this be the start of you doing a few of them, since you're bringing John Dorsey on soon.
Yeah, and I got Jem Fair in between.
Nice.
So there's going to at least be 3 in this run
the next new season.
The next new season. There's going to be at least 3, hopefully more. I'll talk with some folks, reach out.
Nice.
Yeah, and kind of get this together. So, yeah. American Aorta, newest collection. Mm-hmm. We were last on talking about photography, but...
Yes. We have done that, because the photography book came out at the same time as Aorta, which was not intentional, but that's how it worked.
Yes.
I never mean to do 2 books at once, and somehow it always happens. Good problems to have, I believe.
Yes.
So.
Yes, and we didn't get to do this. I was in a slump or in a spiral or I was busy when the book launch party came out, where I actually picked up the book, and then I finally bothered to read it, and here we are.
Well, thank you for reading it. I'm glad you enjoyed it enough to invite me.
Yes, and it is always a pleasure, and it is always, I think, not the biggest thing, but the big thing I want to talk about is the way I'm always impressed whenever I read the new Jason Baldinger, that your style, I can always tell 10 pages in, your stylistic evolution has taken another step.
Yes.
And yeah, I just want to talk about that and how, like, this new voice, or what you're aiming for, or how you find, like, your own mechanics of this happening.
Well, I mean, we've talked about the fact that I over the years stripped my writing down to basics at one point in time. Probably, if we get right to it, around about This Useless Beauty, I hit that point where it was like, this is as sparse as we can get, at the time. And at that point, you start building back up. I did that selected along the way too, which then caused me to have to deeply look at what I had written over 10 years and see all the little tricks and games and gimmicks, and I didn't know how to end this, so I did this, or
yeah,
because we all have these little things that we sneak in, or we're trying to be clever or whatever, and I got a chance to go, oh shit, well, that stuff was unnecessary, let's fix this. And simultaneously, then again, you have, I think, Blind into Leaving, the chapbook that came out in 2019 after that road trip, that god-awful road trip. You have this steeping of Americana that I've been, the Americana that I've been steeping in for 20 years or so, finally just starts coming out, and I think that's where Aorta is at that point too. We starting this book into the pandemic, I wasn't able to travel, so I was thinking back on things that I hadn't written about over the years, and then you also had 2 anniversaries of cross-country trips. 10-year anniversaries coming during those plague years, so you want to go and see the country again, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
So you start thinking about the places you've been, and maybe romanticizing, or telling tall tales, or stretching the reality of what that was. Things I couldn't have done when I wrote The Lower 48, which I think is the closest to this book. You also have that very obvious me driving back and forth to Missouri for 5 years, and that is mostly what this book is. It's the stories spur off of this back and forth across the Midwest, and I've changed somewhat from a Pittsburgh poet now to this ghostly Midwest thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if any of that answers questions, but that's kind of how I see it rolling at this point in time.
No, I mean, that makes a ton of sense, I think, in terms of, and especially in terms of content. You mentioned the pandemic, and I think about this a lot, like, March 14th, 2020 will never happen. Like, March 13th is when my university shut down and we went remote. Right. And actually, the 14th, I did go a couple places. Mm-hmm. And actually, I did have a meeting on the 15th. But then it was March 16th, I stayed in for 3 months.
Yeah.
And at some point, a friend on one of the social media platforms said, we're never going back to the world the way it was, right?
Yeah, and you don't.
And that totally freaked me out. But I do find now that when I think about places and I go, oh, that's still there,
yeah.
Or that's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. There is this like almost sort of immediate perspective, like, we're almost having now near nostalgia for the world 2 years ago.
Yes.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
Or how it was. And does that enter into maybe your headspace as you're writing these poems? Or was you writing the poems for American Aorta?
I didn't write a lot during the first summer of the pandemic. It would have been when we shifted into 2021, I guess. And the core of this book kind of came in like 3 weeks, and then the rest of it was just sort of filtering out because it was just like, I never wrote a poem about that day in Shenandoah National, or the waitress who tried to pick me up in Indiana, or this or that or the other thing. And there are things maybe I attempted and I was never happy with where I got with it. But you find yourself romanticizing this thing that you can't do suddenly.
Yeah.
And for someone who is, 2 big trips, week to 14-day trips a year, and then weekends, generally 1 weekend a month, sometimes 2, that's a big change to only leave PA like 3 times in a year.
Wow.
And most of those were accidental. Like I was in Quebec Run, which is, right on the Maryland border, right on the West Virginia border. So it's just like one wrong turn and I was in West Virginia, and then I was in Maryland, and then it's back in PA.
Yeah.
Wow, what the hell did I do that? But it changes everything that quickly. So it bummed me out. So it took a while to write, and then it just sort of happened. And absorbing Americana, it just comes out in weird ways at certain points and times. And I, of course, love minutia as well. So you pick up weird things when you're traveling through places, and then they keep popping up in your writing, like pawpaw trees, or like
yes,
like bars in Richmond, Indiana, of which there's 3 poems that are written in the same bar in Richmond, Indiana, in this book.
That's cool. And I think the other thing is then the stylistic, like I said, the stylistic evolution of getting, I think, even more stark.
Mm-hmm. I would say.
That the poems, while they still describe the present, the past at the same time. Sometimes there's complex histories there. Mm-hmm. There are scenes, or I want to say, I can't even use the word chaotic because they're not, because there's so much space. There's all this stuff, but there's still all this space.
When you're driving, that's kind of where you are, right? You're both, traveling through, but you have all the vacancy, so you you deposit what you've taken with you along, or you strew it across the country as you're going, and then you find it back wherever, John Brown's a great example of this. I fucking follow John Brown all over the goddamn country at this point in time, and anytime I end up in a city and there's a John Brown memorial or marker, or he was there for some reason, I gotta go fucking seek it out, because it's like, oh, well, John and I just keep running into each other, so we must be friends, or must have been friends, or, something like that. And, then you have this weird thing where, I'm constantly, hanging out with John Brown in places, or Walt Whitman, or... No, I mean... It also is for me, now that you say that, I mean... My brother-in-law was here this weekend, and we were just sort of explaining Pittsburgh, and he hadn't been to Pittsburgh in 15, 20 years. Okay. So it's a very different Pittsburgh. Then.
It's a very different Pittsburgh, and we were sort of explaining that, and you have reason at one point to go, through Penn Avenue and East Liberty, and it's like the new money or the continual money or the money that has come into this place, the Paris of Appalachia, has wiped so much of it clean. And I remember old Pittsburgh, or like sort of shitty old Pittsburgh, or Pittsburgh when it felt like the end of civilization.
2008, when I figured 5 more years and I'd be shutting off the lights for the rest of the city.
Yeah.
I'd be the only one here.
Yeah. And the exact opposite has happened.
No, I never expected this, although not surprising. I remember those early aughts and mid-aughts years when I'd have friends in bands, coming in from, whatever East Coast city, and we'd be driving around and they'd be like, how much is rent in this neighborhood? And I'd be like, I don't know, like $400 or $500. And they'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? This same apartment is $2,000 in my city,
Yes.
So it was like, you can't exist in that secret world anymore.
No.
The internet is a thing, and the New York Times will find you.
Yes. And then other people will find you after them because they saw you in the New York Times. Yeah. Which, is feels like a lot of the city's gone or whatever, but for me it is like if you go somewhere outside, you still have that sense. And he asked, he'd never been to West Virginia. Oh. And I was this close. He was only with us for 2 days, and it was his daughter, my niece, was having an event, and there was like, we're going to need to go get her at the convention center. And he's like, I've never been to West Virginia. What's it like?
Take him to a holler anywhere here.
Yeah.
And you'll get the same sort of feel.
See, I feel it is different for me.
There is.
There is a difference. There is a greater presence and persistence of the past.
Yes.
And like that it is like if you want that kind of time travel, and if you want to see places that haven't changed since 19 whatever.
West Virginia can certainly be
West
that
Virginia
place.
Is the place.
Well.
And and that for me is travel, and I think that's the Rust Belt. Mm-hmm. Those like sort of mid to small size Rust Belt cities that you write about.
Mm-hmm. They're the only place I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote about that, I think, years ago when I did the lower 48, where, I'm always looking with the eyes of my childhood at these places, because, I mean, I grew up here in the 80s. You saw how bad it got. Yeah. You were in Johnstown or wherever you were at that point in time.
Yeah. I'd come and do family visits at Grandma's house. And feeling like I was in this radically different world from New Jersey, where, again, it's, the ants or the maggots are always scattering, the carcass. Mm-hmm. If the carcass is a landscape, or the landscape is a carcass, the maggots are always eating it. Like, it's that time-lapse photography video of, like, an animal carcass being devoured and decaying. It's like, that's the landscape in New Jersey. Nothing really stays, unless it's like a Camden, nothing really stays itself for very long.
No, because it's constantly getting recycled. But.
Yes, whereas, in Pittsburgh has become recycled.
Starting to become much more recycled.
Yes.
That old Pittsburgh is still here, but you definitely have to look under the patina just a little bit more now.
Yes.
So.
Or it's like you have to find Pittsburgh in Wilkinsburg or Aliquippa.
Mm-hmm. Which is easy enough to do.
Yeah. Which even now New Kensington is coming back to something or turning into some new thing. And
Yeah.
But it's, for me, it's all, this book is so interesting because I still have such a strong impression of these places. And places I've never been to Richmond, Indiana, but I feel like I know Richmond, Indiana from reading your works.
It was where the Gannett plant was in the 1919, or in the late teens, early 20s. And there is a city park there now where the Gannett plant was, where they occasionally do shows. But there's also a Walk of Fame, which has all these mosaics of all these people who recorded for Gannett in that place. So Charlie Patton, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Hoagie Carmichael, Uncle Dave Macon. So you just walk through this little walkway of mosaics of all these wonderful old musicians that we don't notice or talk about much anymore in some cases. So so it's a wonderful space for that, but it ain't doing so well as a town.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, I think I said that once, and the difference, I said that once to a history professor at St. Francis. I made the comment, I grew up in a place, my first family house I remember as a child, supposedly there was a ghost of a Revolutionary War soldier haunting the house across the street. The house that I consider the one I grew up in, George Washington had stayed.
Okay.
Literally at a house across the street and 2 doors over. Had slept in that house. It's a 17th century house.
Okay.
Yeah. People had been living on my street in South Plainfield since 1666.
Okay. So it had been around.
Yes, it has been around, but when I go to Cambria County, I've never been to a place where the past was more important.
Right. I mean,
than there.
It's still
because
right
they
there.
barely have a present.
Yeah.
And I feel all that, but again, I think the language has gotten so much more efficient. Maybe that's the word I want.
I did cut a lot of fat, and I learned to play a little bit more so that everything jumps. Whether it's the drugs I take or whatever, I don't know. But I have fun with the sort of psychedelic sprawl while still trying to be concise. Does that make sense?
That absolutely does make sense, and I think the fact that again we're having these so we're talking lower cases except for the singular I.
And I would go lowercase on those if it didn't look so grammatically odd.
Yes.
But I made a decision years ago that you don't, word programs, whatnot, cannot hold the power over me to tell me what should be capitalized.
Yes.
So Walmart should not be capitalized, nor should Jesus.
Yes.
And if that's the case, then nothing should really be capitalized, because why don't we just lowercase everything? It'll be like European villages where nothing can be taller than the church.
Yes. And also there's I see comma, I see some apostrophes, I saw one exclamation point.
Oh, I did away with punctuation years ago.
You did away with punctuation.
I only use it in lines generally, and I've even tried to get away from that. I just want this to be clean. A lot of it is editing too, because when you work in small press, as you know, and anybody else out there, editors aren't easy to come by, and most publishers do not edit your work.
Yeah.
You are responsible for editing your own work and making sure that when it comes out, it's as clean as it can get.
Yes.
And that was a lesson that I needed to learn early, and I think I've consistently gotten better at it. But
absolutely.
One of the ways that you prevent that is to stop fucking putting things in there that you can misuse.
Yes.
I'm not the greatest grammarian.
But I even think about, as I'm teaching poetry workshop with my students this semester, just thinking about how much the line break does so much work in your poetry now.
Well, that takes over for the comma. It takes
over the period. It takes over for yes.
Yeah, so if you do your line breaks right, then you're fine, and it should read great.
It should read great, and the fact that you get to do it, in lines that are mostly around 5 words.
We keep it short.
We do keep it short, and again, I think that's just so impressive.
Part of that is probably because I it's a bad habit, but I've gotten into just using the phone for most everything. And it's there, so why the fuck wouldn't you? The Notes app is the best thing in the world, and if not, then you have a voice recorder. And we were talking pre-show about driving, but I love voice record, and just sitting there and working through something when you're driving, and you can just keep saying the same damn line. It doesn't matter until you find what the cadence is and where it is, and then add the next one, and then keep going, or then go back and go, nope, kill that, fix this,
See, I find even working on the phone, it makes me realize, like, for me, as someone who wants to be very verbose, well, I mean, it's this thing that I guess I'm impressed by, because it's this that you've mastered this thing I struggle with.
Okay.
And I found that for me, working on the phone, if I can fit the whole poem in a screenshot,
right? That's what you're trying to do.
I've done it. That line's not too long. There's not too many moving parts.
Right.
And like it helps to sometimes be open with my students and about struggle, and we talked about synchronic lines, which are one moment, or diasynchronic, more than one moment. And I was like, I was thinking about saying to them, it was one of those things that class was over, and I should have said, if you could have put a dog shock collar on me every time I try to write about 2 moments instead of just one. I would learn.
Well, I mean, and for me, I'm constantly... You could make the argument in a lot of cases that maybe these are 2 poems, that I've just sort of jammed together and accordion into one. Yeah. Because you usually got 2 different narratives running around each other. But I like the complexity that way. Yes. And it keeps you going. You have to then wonder or ask more questions about what you're seeing or what you're dealing with. It's a way to entertain myself as I do this. And that's ultimately what we're doing here. Yes. If you're not entertaining yourself first, fuck it, you lost.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Which, with that mind, as much as we're talking about style, can we hear when pigs fly?
Surely.
On page 27.
All right. So this is a poem about Denora, technically. Sort of, mostly.
It's got 2 parts, people. It's got 2 parts.
It does. There's a lot going on. When pigs fly. Maybe pigs will fly. Take a running start down St. Nicholas into the wind like early sons of aviation before crashing into the Monongahela. Maybe they'll launch from Waddell Avenue, a Doppler squeal lost in a mothball sky. In this valley of work, anything is possible. Even the great American dream. Stan Musial could flat out hit. From the back of the batter's box, bat sweeping across the plate, ball bouncing off the left field wall, he hustles into second. He worked off seasons as a freight checker at U.S. Steel. His wife set up housekeeping a few blocks from where he was born. Maybe the world was smaller then. They were off to St. Louis when the inversion started. Smog veils, this valley nightmare, gossamer sunsets, Halloween gas masks, the weight that sits suffocating on your chest. It was no surprise when people started to die. It was no surprise. Doom settled into this city in smog. Musial collected his parents, sent them to enjoy their dotage somewhere in suburban Missouri. And he didn't come back. Not to sit on a jeep on Thanksgiving as parades death marched from the sons of Italy past the rooming houses as hills knife downriver to Forbes Field. Cardinals and traveling gray, Musial sends Bob Friend's fastball on a right field ricochet. Clemente fields it cleanly, fires it home. Musial is at second, he tips his hat as pigs fly by. The valley of work gasps for breath. The rich will always get richer. The air may recover. Really, it's more lottery than dream. Another poem where I obviously love minutia a lot.
Yes.
But if you... That... Oh.
Would you like a paper towel?
If you got one handy.
I don't, but talk about minutia. I'm going to go get a paper towel. Because sometimes when Straub gets very cold,
sometimes it
gets
dances.
very foamy, yes.
Yeah, if you are in Denora on the main drag near, well, that is Waddell Avenue, I think, going towards the Chinese restaurant where the museum is, you know, that poem just sort of flows with Waddell Avenue as it drops downriver. Thank you.
Welcome.
I got a crotch full of Straub like it's Gooskies in 2005.
Ooh, baby.
Hot damn.
That's a poem. That could be a poem.
Could be a poem.
Gooskies, enjoy it while it's still here. Except you. Does anybody enjoy Gooskies?
I don't think anybody enjoys Gooskies anymore. Sorry, Marcus.
No, I think that was years ago. That was over.
Yeah, it's been over for a while. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, Musil being from
Denora.
Denora, the EPA being founded primarily because of Denora and the smog inversion. I didn't know that the Monongahela area, river area around there was actually really big with aviation early on, which was just a little thing that I picked up. But you just start blendering all these things together, and that's the Alpo can that comes out on the other side. So
yes, and Denora is definitely one of those places. We went for a little drive over my winter break. There was a day the weather was good, and we just kind of was like, let's go 885 to 837 as far as we could go on 837 before it's like I want to go home.
California University, pretty much.
Pretty much. We went to Cal U and turned around. And I was like, West Virginia's too far. Well, turn around. Point Marion, turned around at Cal U, but yeah, Denora is one of those places that has not, but it has, but it hasn't changed.
And it's got this rich history of ball players and, so much. Oh, dogs are knocking, I think.
I think they are. Because they know we're in here.
What are you doing?
What are you doing? And also, yeah. Though I did learn something really fascinating about Denora.
What's that?
When the zinc smelter was there, and the zinc smelter was the reason for the fog, no vegetation grew in that valley. People lived there, and there were no trees, no grass.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it was the PBS special that talked about it. And one of the people, it was a young person, like, the hills were great for sledding because you could go all the way and not hit nothing. And it was like, wow, and like people lived in that. Human beings lived in that environment. Stan Musial lived in that environment,
and still could hit a fastball somehow.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm almost positive I've said this to you at one point in time or another. But my buddy Steve Pellegrino, who I've done work with and has been a long-time friend of mine, grew up in New Eagle. And when he was a kid, he got poison ivy, any other skin rash, the doctor just said, jump in the river. It'll kill whatever. You'll be fine.
Wow.
Yeah, just jump in the river. Don't worry about it. Nah, that's how you cured whatever was crawling on you at that point.
Wow.
Maybe it didn't work for eczema, but it surely worked for everything else.
And might have inspired other things, but I would think, wow. Yeah. Wow, I had heard a story once that there was a spot in the Delaware River. There was a spot that was oily, and you would get tar on your boat. But there was another spot that then there was like a turpentine plant. Oh. And the runoff from that, so what you would do is you just tie your boat up on this other dock for about a week, and just the flow of the current would clean your boat.
Clean the boat off, yeah. That's Pittsburgh before we started to try and clean our rivers, and before we even started to consider our rivers to be resources, which I know Toledo has done with the Maumee, and I think more cities need to think about that as a concept, but that's beside the point.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
But yeah, I think that poem just really does capture, again, my geek love
Of the
for
Rust
this
Belt.
collection.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, I love
and
that.
the way that this works and the way that this history collides.
Yeah,
And-
I need context anywhere
Yes.
I am, so I just keep shoving context in, and, eventually it becomes meta context, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that even Clemente makes an appearance is...
Well, how could I write a poem about the pirates, of that era and not put Clemente in? Or Bob Fred, for that fact. I mean,
Yeah.
they were two of the best parts of those late 60s, well, mid-50s teams into their early 60s. Fred was earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never gotten Clemente into a poem. It was a good time for it.
Did not know that. That's
Benny Santiago, but not Clemente.
That's right. Benny Santiago. And we played
And
how
I
many
think Ivo
games?
Nova.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's odd how that works, but...
Yeah. Yeah. Waiting for the Rob Mankowiak poem.
Oh. I might be able to actually do that.
You will someday. I have faith. That you
I
will.
remember the doubleheader that his first son, I think, was born, and he walked off the second game with a grand slam. I believe the first game he also walked off with a hit. So it was just like one of those magical games, where somebody's like lit and they go 7 for 8 on a doubleheader, and we won 2 games against Cleveland. That had to be like 2005 or 6. I'm sure I could figure it out, but in the loose sense, that's where my brain says it was right now. Seems right. Rob McCoy, Jesus. What a bummer this fucking baseball team's been for 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
2015 aside, of course.
2015 aside.
It still looks miserable.
Yeah, it still looks miserable, structurally. Though I will say, I keep thinking about this. Our mutual friend John Grigalski posted about posted that picture of Andy Van Slyke sitting in center field after Sid Bream scored, and I still have the TV I watched that on in this house.
I don't, but I was at the game that they clinched their 20th, and I came home and I drank J&B scotch out of the bottle while watching the slide over and over and over again.
And that's the 20th losing season in a row.
That was how I celebrated the
just
record.
watching that slide.
Just
Wow.
watch that slide over and over again. Hit the J&B, let it roll.
Yeah, wow. But yeah, I watched that on the black and white TV in my kitchen.
Yeah. Now, I remember from a kid, I was incredulous, and I don't know that 35 years later I'm any less incredulous.
Yeah, it's wild how a team can shatter like that. I mean, it's the heartbreaking thing about baseball. But
Yeah.
you could be an out away, and
At least I'm not Donnie Moore.
yeah,
So, there's that. So,
not anymore.
it always
Fatal
gets dark.
pitch. It always gets dark. That was really look up, folks, the fatal pitch of Donnie Moore if you want to know what we're talking about.
Old Buckner ball.
And the Buckner ball. Though that wasn't fully his fault.
No, it wasn't, but Donnie Moore apparently really took it.
Hard.
Yeah, and it led to his demise, unfortunately.
Yeah. And his family, when the Angels did win the World Series, the Angels wanted to invite. They were having a day, and his family was like, "Fuck you, people."
Well, I understand.
And I understand that completely. Yeah. But Buckner has days. But speaking of which, can we go to the Rust Belt Undead on 67?
Sure.
My other request, and I actually thought of a new request that I'll surprise you with. But of course, you're also welcome to read whatever the hell you want from your own book.
We got to talk about the soundtrack, so I'm going to read the poem from that in a moment too.
Yes, let's do that.
Among the Rust Belt Undead. The memory of your passing wafts across social media this morning. I play one of your songs, 11 distorted, roaring minutes. Every day is another stupid miracle. The silent shouts of my phone in the fog of that January night. Sleeplessness led to weariness. Disconsolate drives along thick gray pastures before the coming of mountains. Cold blast of open windows kept me steady. Behind the wheel this morn, I trace these river roads, tarry among rust-belt undead, under a sky martyred between cooling towers, methane crackers, those sharp plumes toxic white, the orange runoffs into the Ohio. Desolate arteries of forgotten, frozen towns. A man stops me on the street in high Ohio Valley nasal whine. "'Tis town's dead, ain't it?" And I look around a second. Clouds reflected in windows. This has to be a simulation. I nod, mumble. Sure is. Truth is far more grim. Rust flecks animated blood in a snow globe, the endlessness of neglect. Pretty boy Floyd is stuck, a fly with wings coated in newsprint. I turn inland and follow headlines to the tune of October 22nd, 1934. Your wife texts, with offers of beer and burgers, company to salve this loneliness. I'm hours away from anywhere, still at a strip mall red light. A sign stares back with little grace. You can't break a city forged in steel. Yeah. I've always been fascinated by the fact that Pretty Boy Floyd was gunned down in East Liverpool, Ohio.
Yeah.
So I think about him often whenever I drive that area. I mean, with the rich history of outlaws in America, it tends to be something that catches my attention in most places, because it's one of the histories that still bleeds through somehow.
Yeah.
You know, I guess the Robin Hood and the American Dream have a lot more in common than I had ever thought. You know, until you sit down and start thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I was gonna read you, and then I'll take your request.
Okay.
The Deep Ellum Blues, because I mean it's a fucking nuts poem. First off, I love it. But there's a soundtrack, which whenever we post the website, there'll be a link. But there is so much music in this book, perhaps more than any other book I've written thus far, that as I was going through, I'm not usually a guy to give clues to anything. Everything's pretty easy to look up here, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't take that much effort, but there's so much music, and so much of it might be slightly obscure. So the Deep Ellum Blues is a great example of that. It's a Shelton Brothers song that's on the Anthology of American Folk Music, that was later covered by the Grateful Dead. But then the poem, oh, by the way, it's 41.
I just got there.
I realized you might have been searching. I have my glasses off right now because I can't read with them on. But it mentions a Flatlander song at the start, a Butthole Surfers song, and I think one more. I can't even remember at this point in time. But then, on top of that, it's a conversation at the end between myself and the Dallas poet, Paul Konecki, who anytime we're together, it somehow denigrates into the fact that he's going to be Larry Levis and I'm going to be Phil Levine. So we start to communicate in these terms. So all those side pieces of information. This is the Deep Ellum Blues for Paul Konecki. I've never seen Dallas from a DC-10 at night, but the saw that floats through that Flatlander song is every phantom embodied across the miles, Lubbock to Wichita Falls. I've never taken the 287 ramp, followed highways into the Zapruder film, and now history is a Butthole Surfers video. Allen Dulles was wholly responsible for the Kennedy assassination, for America's second bloody coup. He was killed because the Cuban Missile Crisis had turned Kennedy from hawk to chicken hawk. It tore out his spine and left him with a world longing for peace. Revenge and capitalism cannot survive peace. Hence Lee Harvey Oswald, hence Jack Ruby, hence what really happened on the grassy knoll can carry its weight in mystery. Paul, I headed for Texarkana because sometimes the road offers no salvation. Sometimes the wheels are another form of madness. We should be smoking joints in the backyard of Oswald's rooming house, and you'd look at me as Larry Levis and say, "So Death blows his little fucking trumpet. Big deal." And I'd answer as Phil Levine, "I can hear the even breathing of all that is wordless and final." And the Butthole Surfers play The Shaw Sleeps in Lee Harvey's Grave, and maybe our preaching days are through. Because when the night dusts off those Tejas stars, fuck if I don't fall hard into the Deep Ellum blues. What was your request there?
My special request, just on page 45, a few pages later, Mr. Clarinet.
Oh, that's a poem I've actually never read out.
Ah, world premiere here on the podcast.
Yeah, I always liked this poem, but it just kind of got... This was a pandemic poem because I was in Detroit like 2 weeks before the pandemic started. So that's how this all kind of comes out. So this is... are you familiar with the Ben Shahn painting for Mr. Clarinet?
Yes.
Okay, it's in the DIA, and it's a wild painting, sort of explained in the poem, but if you're listening at home right now, look up Ben Shahn's Mr. Clarinet, and you'll understand.
There'll be a link.
There'll be a link there
on the website, too.
So Mr. Clarinet for Ben Shahn. Here's to anxiety, Mr. Clarinet. I never thought this would be the first or the last day in the garden. Eden is midwinter Detroit. We're playing shuffleboard, cold plank glasses, grains of sand. Adam and Eve at it on the couch. Eve straddling Adam, the dry hump Olympics last more than one beer. Mr. Clarinet, if you could draw down your knotted hands, bring up the horn with its reeds on fire, blow something to make us think about how we'll feel when time dies. Remind us that with all the careful construction of mythologies, that God is dead. Mr. Clarinet, or God has failed, whichever. Mr. Clarinet, bring up the horn with its scary clowns. Play an elegy that sounds like Jimmy Giuffre chasing Raymond Scott while Adam and Eve swallow static sparks. Penance is always eviction. Mr. Clarinet, the anxiety is real every day, in or out of the garden. Eve has dismounted. She's smoothing fabric. Adam is bow-legged. You're right to keep your hands covering up this horror. Adam and Eve walk into an exiled night. When we finish our beers, we'll do the same. Not one fucking snake in sight. I mean, what else would you expect?
Yes! Yes, the biblical turn.
I mean, there's nothing worse than seeing just like gratuitous public displays of affection when you're just not looking forward to it, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know how often I'm looking forward to gratuitous public displays of affection at this age.
Yeah.
It's like, could you calm it down? Go to your car. Anything.
Get a hotel room.
Yes, please. It's Detroit. You'll be fine. Go find someplace nice. Oh, man. Yeah, so... I don't know. Is there something else I wanted to read you in here?
Is there? I think there is. There should be.
It probably should be. After Mr. Clarinet, actually, let's read one of the poems that I don't read all the time that's also from Richmond, Indiana. One of the three. This is the High and 100 Proof Choir. Each of the poems gives you a hint that it happens in the same place because they talk to each other. All three of these poems across the book. The High and 100 Proof Choir. Legs hang from a sky choked out in deep black. It's threatened since Dayton. Hang on hydroplane. The torrents come the other side of the state line. This bar is overrun with roughnecks. Road crew yellow shirts, stained evening happy hour spirals into night. Slurs, bravado, exchange punches across the bar, these working man things. Blonde secretary runs the jukebox. Senior prom hits from a decade ago, back when day jobs were nightmares only parents talked about. And outside, it's howling. The road crew knows that each drink that takes today's pain starts tomorrow's deficit. They fall off stools into autopilot drunk drives. Into bed as they muster, they whisper a prayer to weather. And I'll pray tonight with the high and 100-proof choir. Let the rains come. Let the jobs and the roads wash away. Let us sleep deep into the infinity of an unexpected 3-day weekend. These savored gifts, braced against a hangover's pain. Yeah, I just stay in the same hotel. It's a Red Roof Inn. It's right off 70, and there is a Mexican restaurant called the El Bronco that's right in the parking lot. So I don't have to do anything. I just have to get 5 hours, park the car, eat an edible, walk in, drink a huge fucking margarita, and get some choripollo. And then when the tequila kicks in, I just have to make it back to the hotel room, which is 10 feet away. It's perfect. It's exactly what you want when you're, trying to run yourself out, I guess. And then the speedway's right across the street, so you get the gas and you keep going on to Missouri then.
Yeah, no, that...
Trying to think if there's an older poem. I know I mentioned that a few of these are from our memories of older trips. So let me just pull one of those. Actually, let's read this because it'll be more fun. 33.
All right.
I always have fun with this poem. Because, Bigfoot. We pray the angels met you on the other shore. Don't know about your apocalypse, but I'm running out end times, shuddering down a dirt mountain road in a new used car I paid cash on the barrelhead for. Dust cloud and the rear view rises with morning mist. Keep alternating whiplash, juice, gas, then brake. That drop off into the creek gives me a side eye. And I'm sniffing out a trailhead, trying to find a mountain to dose space dust with. I hear it before I smell it. Goddamn, those old mother mountains are whistling, "Oh, Danny boy." And evidently every damn word is etched in my DNA. I sing along and try to not to get myself all weepy-eyed melancholy. And then it dawns on me. That ain't the fucking mountains. It's an actual set of bagpipes. Sweet and sour tone all over a rushing morning stream. Sun clears that side of the mountain, blind a moment, slow to realize I am locking eyes with a goddamn bagpipe playing Bigfoot. Watch the Patterson Gimlin film. I am in no way starstruck. This is another awkward moment in a lifetime of them. There is nothing more to see, nothing more than notes floating in dust. We pray the angels met you on the other shore. I have so much fun trying to write Bigfoot poems.
Yeah.
There needs to be more Bigfoot poems in the world.
There needs to be more Bigfoot poems.
Maybe there's a Bigfoot anthology out there. I should look into that.
Yeah.
If not, maybe I'll put myself out there to make one happen.
Yes. And last year they saw somebody claimed to see Bigfoot in Evansburg.
This doesn't surprise me. I mean, the PA Ohio border has more Bigfoot sightings than almost anywhere else in America, apparently.
Yeah.
So the space-time continuum is somehow completely broken on that line.
Which makes sense.
I mean, there's a lot of open space, and there's a spillway full of fish somewhere, so, it's got to be convenient for picking up a bite along the way.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to hear?
Well, if we're talking Bigfoot poems, page 53 has Mile High Sasquatch.
Oh, the other Bigfoot poem.
Yes, might as well.
And there's a poem from when I was in the Smokies in like 2013 that, again, just sort of happened while thinking about not being able to go to the Smokies. Mile High Sasquatch. My uncle drove trucks all his life, assuming his life started after he left Vietnam. We haven't talked in years, but he and his truck driver's son tell stories riddled with roots. Read between the lines. Even numbers in North, and it all went to shit. Odd numbers in South, and there is no permanence to anything. You want to wrestle East or West, you better have a full beer and something hard for a chaser. I wonder if, like me, he fell in love one night in a Moorhead, Kentucky motel, only to be estranged by Chillicothe. Maybe for him it was Hue to Da Nang. I never asked, as he only speaks about the war in racism and bravado the way he was trained. I wonder if, like me, he sat on a mountain above a ghost town, alternating tired feet in an ice-cold stream, laughing madman or mile-high Sasquatch, breathing in every cloud in a chilled spring sky. Maybe it's as Ho Chi Minh said, man and animals rise up reborn. What could be more natural? Robert Mitchum said the snakes are my friend. He said it with weariness. Weariness. A person who carries more than their weight in miles. I have a drink of beer here. I remember I was on the Elkmont Trail in the Smokies, and I'd been hiking. I was probably around 10 or 11 miles at that point in time of the day. And my legs were done. And when I got to the top of the mountain, there was this beautiful stream, but it was late April. So I just put both feet in and immediately yanked both feet out because the water was frigid.
Yeah.
So I ended up with one foot in the stream, and I'd giggle, and then I'd take it out and put the other foot in, and I'm just like sitting there, like rolling on a rock, one foot in, and a couple came up from behind me, just like utterly terrified by the glee of this large man, who's like sweating and beleaguered on top of a mountain, just going, I had to look like a fucking troll to them or something. I'm sure I ruined their hike, but I was having fun. It was like when I was in Montana, hiking a glacier, where if you hike by yourself, you're supposed to have bear mace or bear bells or whatnot. And if you don't have those things, then you're supposed to clap and start singing or yelling loudly once every few minutes. If you don't see a human for 5 to 10 minutes, you need to make sure you're not prey, basically, So, be on the trail, and at that point in time, the going to the Sun Road wasn't open. I was there in May. So I was as far into the park as you could get on foot. So there were a lot of people on that trail. So I wouldn't see anybody, and I'd start clapping and singing, and then someone would inevitably come over the hill and it'd be like, what the fuck are you doing, buddy? Just fine here. Just enjoying myself. Enjoying these woods. That time I found a big pile of bear scat, though, and figured it was a good idea to come back.
Yeah.
That was the point where I was like, yeah, maybe it's time.
Maybe it's time, which is, I was near the spot on the Ghost Town Trail where someone had thought they'd seen Bigfoot in last April, I think it was. And
nice.
And not far from that spot was bear shit. And I was like, I can put one and one together here.
Yeah,
and,
you saw a bear standing. It's
fine. Yes.
Black bears get tall.
Yes.
So it's okay. How are we doing on time there, buddy?
We maybe have time for one more. For
All right.
the bottom, I guess it's going to be the bottom two, because I can only think of
Bottom two.
2 questions.
All right. Where do we want to go here?
Where do we want to go? I was wondering about Hang On Skyline, maybe, on
sure.
page 111.
Another Smokies poem. Well,
Yeah.
that was actually Shenandoah.
Which you mentioned earlier, so we're closing a loop.
Yes, there we go. Hang On Skyline. These mountains, these clear daughters of stars, reach to the sky to catch a falling supermoon. And here I am, stoned witness mugging with Yogi Bear. Ranger Smith can keep his picnic basket. We're rolling like Mezzero. Yeah, babe, these are really the blues. Half-baked eyes, drop-off consciousness in a sleeping bag. My heart beats into the earth. Wake to cold morning bones. Bitter shouts of shattered glass. I drag myself to showers only to find hope lukewarm. There are no smooth edges here without hot water. As I suffer, a yellow jacket, shattered glass exoskeleton drags across tile floor towards my truck stop foot. And I stand in cold, running water as this bee keels over its shutters in that familiar way we all do when the secrets of consciousness leave us. Suddenly, this yellow jacket is only an empty exoskeleton, and I am running water alone. I blast heat to reknit bones as I chase mist up this river of spruce, this hang-on skyline. With a waterfall, I stop and undress in orange, let myself feel like a truck stop in the first light of the morning. Someday, someone may find my body at the bottom of White Oak Canyon, an empty exoskeleton with crows for eyes, all the secrets of consciousness. Rise in the mist of the morning, then dissipate in a forever blue sky. Yeah, that's a poem that took a couple tries.
Yeah, no.
I recently had COVID, so I haven't done this in a few years, but I was going through the mass folder of dead drafts and other things, and I found a earlier draft of Skyline that I forgot that I had written, and it's really good too, but it's a very different poem.
Yeah.
So it's like, maybe someday that one actually should come out, so maybe I'll sneak it into something along the way. The Hang on Skyline demo.
Ooh, that would be an interesting poetic project.
Yeah. I'm not a multiple draft poet because I usually work things pretty well before they hit a page, or the start is worked out enough and the rest just kind of comes and you just kind of locate the ending, or you write the ending. It's one or the other. Sometimes you overwrite the ending, but you can find it usually somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also for me thinking about. I'm also subjecting my poetry students to Richard Hugo's The Triggering Town.
Okay.
And this this idea of tomorrow's class, if they read and actually did the damn reading for class, there's the line there's really no way to teach writing, but maybe a good teacher can save someone 10 years.
Yeah.
Which is I was like, yeah, that's the truth, but also this question of like how, for certain ideas, for certain triggering subjects to come out correctly, there is a certain skill level.
Yes.
That you have to get to in order to make it all work.
There is, I mean, like Hang on Skyline and the one that I read before that, Mile High Sasquatch. I didn't write much about that trip that I took in 2013, and I don't know if I knew how to.
Yeah.
You have to kind of get, step up on the ladder and keep going before you can really tackle some of those subjects. Death is hard to write about. And especially when you are starting to theorize about your own or thinking about your own absence, that's even harder. I mean, thinking about someone else's absence is more concrete.
Yes. But still can sometimes be too big.
Yes, it's still huge, but your own, we don't do that around these parts. So.
Yeah, so we'll get to, I guess, the bottom two.
Okay.
I'm not even sure I have two good questions. It's usually the bottom five, folks, for those who listen, but...
I've done too many of them. And
I'm out of questions. I'm out of good questions. I was even looking at the old list, and if there was a way... If any of these didn't have already, and I'm not going back through old episodes, I'm like, which one did I ask before?
I couldn't remember what poems I read. I know we talked about the topography of disappearing at one point in time, and we talked about Don't Spook the Armadillo along the way. So, and both of those are in this book.
Yes. So there'll definitely be links to the soundtrack.
Yes.
To this. There'll be a link to the Mr. Clarinet painting. There's also your reading on Saturday, February 10th in the year of our Lord 2024.
Yeah.
It's 2024, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. You'll be reading, and there'll be a link to that if you want to explain.
Yes. It's Becky Schmeda, who does Trailer Park Quarterly with me. We co-edit together. She also wrote a wonderful, harrowing cycle of poems about abusive women that are coming with a series of photos that I took of prison. They've been in prison in Loretto.
Oh.
That's the next thing that's coming out. So, which will be in another couple months probably.
Cool.
So we're reading together. Curtis Hayes and Wendy Rainey, who are both fantastic Los Angeles poets. Chuck Joy, who's an Erie poet. There's a couple other Erie poets on the bill, and some folks from Eastern Europe, I believe, too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's Walt Whitman Association. This is the Birthplace Zoom reading series. Yes, there's also an in-person one as well. George Wallace runs it. George is, one of those American master poets at this point in time. So
sweet. I'll have the link to that too. So it's now time for the bottom two.
Bottom two.
First question is, what are the ways in which you are unfree?
Unfree?
Yes.
There's a lot. Financially is the most apparent.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot. I don't know how to broach that subject.
Yeah, it's a big one,
It
is, it's, I guess I call it the Slavov Zizek.
Yeah.
Another Zizek reference in your time at my house, not on the podcast. He talks about it when you assume that you are free, you lose the language to articulate your unfreedom.
Yes, I think it's very fair. I mean, again, most apparently is financially, because if your financial needs aren't taken care of in a capitalist economy, you can't just go wander and enjoy yourself and have fun. I still have to work a job, so I'm unfree in that capacity. If we consider that part of the same answer.
Yes, absolutely.
Very much, yeah. I'm sure there are hinges in my brain that I don't know my way around. You kind of locate those, and as you see them, maybe you do this. I know I isolate tracks of old thinking or damaged thinking that I picked up along the way.
Yeah.
You catch yourself saying something, and you're like, wait, is that how I really feel about that? Hang on 1 second. Or that's still how I feel about that. Maybe 20-year-old me would have said that, but not 48-year-old me.
Yes.
So there's always a current of alignment with the various iterations of yourself and the thinking that each one of those persons did. Not to say that they're not the same person, because they aren't. And they are at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll give you those three, at least for now. I don't know how much further I can go with that.
Yeah.
I would have to think a lot more about it. It's a good question. I know that you were bringing Zizek into it, but Fromm's Escape from Freedom was such an important book for that, because it made me understand.
It's on one of these
shelves
right over my shoulder.
There. And everybody should read Fromm's Escape from Freedom at some point in time in their life.
Yes.
For that exact reason. You will think of things. It will change what you think immediately.
Yes.
And better than a drug or anything else. Like, it gets in there and explains why you do this, why you exist this way. And that's sort of the jump-off space, back when psychology was still challenging and not cute.
Yes. Yes. So question 2 is, for me, I think about, there's a scenario that leads to a question. I think for me, we don't talk about this, that in 2016 there were people who came to this country as refugees who made the midnight run to Canada, including people who went through like the wilderness in Quebec to get to, because they needed to. But we haven't reached the threshold where you're sort of like white, born in America, native born citizen has presented themselves at the Canadian border asking for political asylum. Wow. But I feel like that we could get there. We could.
We're about 9 months away from the start of that, I have a feeling.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter who wins, personally. Actually.
Yeah, no, I think that's the real hopeless, depressing, terrible thing about it.
Yeah.
Well, if the one guy wins, it'll be like 10 months.
Yeah.
9 months for the other guy.
Isn't it the Steve Earle line, the Democrats practice, another 4 years of things not getting worse. You're maintaining status quo, whereas, and I don't even know if we're maintaining status quo anymore. We are sliding, no matter which way we go. We are backsliding as a country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you find yourself doing that, and I know people are looking into things like right of return, EU passports. You leave America as a refugee, what would you miss the most?
America itself. I mean...
Which you can miss that, I think, while you're still here. Cause I miss that.
I mean, I think that's a very agreeable concept. I have fallen in love with the landscape of this country over the course of my 27 years driving, whether it be from here to Mississippi or from here to California. I mean, I know other places are gorgeous, and I will find other things to love in there, but there, especially in the last 10 years, as I've gotten to be more free and gotten to see more, there are places that are now so essential to my being that I have to return to them. And I have to keep alternating out places, because I need to be in Missouri. I need to see, the mountains of North Carolina around Hendersonville or Acadia National Park in mid-coastal Maine. Places like that, they become so much a part of my traveling that they've now become DNA. And to lose those places, yeah, sure, maybe I get Banff National Park instead, but it's not the same thing, Canada's also fucking cold, and I don't want to go somewhere cold. I have a bad back.
Yeah.
But I don't know who else will take me. Maybe Scotland.
Yeah.
I hear the Scottish might like someone like me.
Yeah. No, they might, and hopefully they'll get out of their situation to be back in the EU, and
hopefully they get that ironed out too. Yeah.
Yes.
The UK really fucked everybody up on that island, did they not?
Did they not? Yeah.
Ooh. I guess I should rephrase that. Cambridge Analytica really fucked everybody on that island.
Yes.
But let's call it as it is.
Well, I think that's about it. On that note, I think
that's where we have to leave it. Okay.
I think that's a good place to stop. No, you know what I'll say? The thing that blows my mind about maybe this moment in history is, and again, maybe we're not. I think that Cambridge Analytica comment. We're not alone in this dysfunction. That's the other thing. Like England, and I think I need to try to find this again and download it in case it falls out of the internet rabbit hole. Have you ever heard about the Bruce Dickinson Iron Maiden interview?
No.
He was on some Good Morning Britain show.
Okay.
And I have to tell this story, and then we'll end the podcast. We'll end on this note. He was just on some Good Morning Britain show the last time Iron Maiden put out a record.
Okay.
And Bruce Dickinson was openly, enthusiastically pro-Brexit.
Because he was a rich white man.
Yes, but, irony. He was on the show and just kind of generally talking about things, and new Iron Maiden record and whatever. And he's this rambling thing about how he found a bee's nest, and he's like, oh, that's really cool. There's bees at my house and whatever. And then he gets to complaining about post-Brexit England. And how, while Iron Maiden has a new album out, they cannot go that summer and play the big European metal festival for tens of thousands of dollars and more every show.
Mm-hmm.
Because he needs a work visa, and they didn't get the paperwork through in time. And he keeps saying about how, like, our leaders have failed us. There should be an agreement with the EU that allows me to go over there and earn a ridiculous amount of money for an hour and a half of work.
Right.
And the host pointed out, it's like, well, we were in an agreement.
Yeah, we had it. You
And we opted out of it. And he's like, yes, but there should be another agreement. And they're like, do you mean you want to rejoin the European Union? And you could do that. He's like, no, I don't want that. And then, but there should be an agreement. And then there's a moment you can see in his eyes a glint where the train finally jumps the track. And he realizes, wait, so Brexit? That was what that meant? And we opted out of that, and now I'm screwed? Though not screwed. I mean, he's fine.
He's still rich. Yeah,
he's
just
still
not
rich.
going to make as
lose
much money now.
He's not going to lose his house. But there's a moment where he's like, what? And no, we have a new agreement. They should have fixed this by now. And I was like, wow, you can't be wrong. No one could be wrong.
Cutting off your nose despite your face.
Yes. And I think that's about it. We'll end with something a little more ridiculous. Our next episode will eventually happen. There might be 2 more this month. And it will be about something. Our homepage where you can find new and old episodes is gonnadiepodcast.com. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Google Podcasts is going away, but I'm assuming that Google Play Music, I will get a RSS feed code at some point this spring, and we will be on YouTube Music Podcasts.
Woo.
Because Google Podcasts is going away. And all of those things, Audible, Stitcher, TuneIn, I think Stitcher went away too. And maybe Audible's going away? We're on all of those things that piggyback on Apple Podcasts or that I submitted a RSS feed for. I don't even remember anymore where we're all at, but you can Google. Follow us on... Actually, the follow us on the X Twitter thing is a dead thing. I'm just cyber squatting in my own account. We're All Gonna Die is on Facebook. Who the hell's still on Facebook? Special thanks to Andrew Fox for a lovely theme music. Thank you again, Jason. As always,
Thanks,
it
Matt.
is such a pleasure.
Indeed.
Later, meets.